People like to start this story at the wrong place. They started with the money. They started with the name. They started with the buildings that already touched the sky before he ever made a decision on his own. But that's not where the pressure began. Donald John Trump was born into wealth, yes, but wealth does not remove fear. It changes the shape of it. When you're born poor, the fear is starvation. When you're born rich, the fear is becoming invisible inside someone else's shadow. His father, Fred Trump, wasn't just wealthy, he was dominant, disciplined, unforgiving toward weakness, a builder who believed numbers mattered more than feelings and reputation meant survival. In that house, love wasn't spoken, it was measured. You were valuable if you performed. You were tolerated if you obeyed. You were dismissed if you hesitated. Donald learned early that silence was a form of death. At school, he wasn't the smartest. He wasn't the calmest. He wasn't the most liked. What he was loud. Not loud in volume, loud in presence. He pushed back. He argued. He refused to shrink. And that refusal came with consequences. Teachers complained. Authority figures clashed with him. Order didn't comfort him. It challenged him. So his father sent him away, not as punishment in words, but as correction in action. Military school. To many kids, that would have crushed something essential. For Donald, it sharpened something dangerous. Structure taught him hierarchy. Discipline taught him optics. Conflict taught him that dominance often matters more than consensus. He didn't learn humility there. He learned control. And more importantly, he learned that attention is power. When he returned, the path was already drawn. Real estate, the family business, the safe expansion. But safety bored him. New York City in the 1970s was not glamorous. It was dirty, violent, bankrupt in spirit, and that's exactly why he wanted it. Manhattan wasn't just a market, it was a stage. And Trump didn't want to be rich quietly, he wanted to be seen winning. That desire to be visible, undeniable, impossible to ignore, that's the engine people misunderstand. They call it ego, they call it arrogance, they call it insecurity. But underneath it was something simpler, a terror of being dismissed. His early deals weren't flawless. They were aggressive, risk-heavy, leverage-driven. He borrowed big, promised bigger, and spoke as if outcomes were already facts. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And when it didn't, it failed loudly. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the image cracked. Casinos collapsed, debt piled up, banks circled. This wasn't private failure. This was humiliation in headlines. The same media that once praised his ambition now mocked his excess. The same elites who smiled at his rise whispered when he stumbled. Overextended, reckless, a cautionary tale. And here's where most people rewrite history. They imagine a humbled man, a chastened figure learning restraint. That didn't happen. What happened was far more unsettling. Trump didn't retreat. He didn't apologize. He didn't soften his tone. He doubled down on presence. If success had made him famous, failure made him unforgettable. He learned something brutal in that period. The public doesn't reward perfection. It rewards certainty. And certainty, even when wrong, commands attention. As his businesses restructured, as assets were sold, as his name became both a brand and a punchline, he leaned into visibility. Books, television, sound bites. He didn't ask to be liked. He demanded to be heard. And slowly, against logic, against expectation, the narrative bent again. Trump didn't come back as a respected financier. He came back as a character, a symbol. To some, a warning. To others, a fantasy. He understood something the establishment never fully accepted. In the modern world, outrage travels faster than approval, and memorability outlives credibility. That lesson would shape everything that came next. Business was no longer the battlefield. Culture was. And long before politics entered the conversation, Donald Trump was already practicing for a war that wasn't about policy, profit, or consensus. It was about dominance of attention. And this was only the beginning. There's a mistake people make when they look at this phase of his life. They assume the comeback was accidental, that television saved him, that branding patched over broken balance sheets. That's too simple. What Trump was really rebuilding wasn't money, it was relevance. By the late 1990s, wealth in America had changed character. Power was no longer quiet. Influence no longer hid behind institutions. Visibility became currency. Trump understood this instinctively, not academically. He didn't speak like bankers. He didn't dress like old money. He didn't apologize like professionals. He spoke like a man performing certainty. When The Apprentice aired, something strange happened. Millions of people didn't see a failed businessman. They saw authority, not because of spreadsheets, because of posture. "You're fired" wasn't a business lesson. It was theater. And theater repeated enough times becomes belief. Behind the scenes, his finances were still complicated. Licensing replaced ownership. His name became the product. Trump Tower wasn't just real estate. It was a billboard. Gold interiors, oversized letters, excess as identity. Critics laughed, but mockery still spread the image. And here's the part people underestimate. Trump never confused mockery with defeat. He had learned early, from his father, from military school, from New York tabloids, that attention, even hostile attention, keeps you alive. Silence kills careers. Obscurity erases power. So when people mocked him, he responded louder. When elites dismissed him, he positioned himself against them. When experts criticized him, he framed them as enemies. This wasn't improvisation, it was pattern recognition. By the time politics entered the picture, Trump wasn't stepping into a new arena. He was expanding an existing one. America by then was tired. Tired of polished language, tired of rehearsed apologies, tired of leaders who sounded careful but felt distant. Trump didn't sound careful. He sounded reckless. And to a certain segment of the population, recklessness felt honest. When he descended that escalator in 2015, the media treated it as spectacle. They laughed again. Temporary, unserious, a ratings stunt. But Trump wasn't speaking to the media. He was speaking through them. Every insult became a headline. Every controversy fed the cycle. Every attack reinforced the narrative that they were afraid of him. And once again, certainty beat nuance. The campaign wasn't built on unity, it was built on division. Clear enemies, simple slogans, relentless repetition, win, lose, repeat. Experts said it wouldn't work, polls dismissed it, commentators mocked it. And then election night arrived. What followed wasn't just shock, it was disbelief. A man who had been bankrupt, ridiculed, dismissed as unserious, now stood at the center of global power. To his supporters, it was revenge against a system that ignored them. To his critics, it was a nightmare made real. To Trump himself, it was proof. Proof that he had been right about one thing all along, that you don't win by being accepted, you win by refusing to be ignored. But power magnifies everything, including flaws. And the same traits that carried him to the top, defiance, ego, refusal to concede, would soon collide with reality in ways far more brutal than any business failure. Because this time, the losses wouldn't be private, they wouldn't be financial, they would be historic, and they would happen in front of the entire world. Power doesn't change who you are, it removes the filters. Inside the White House, Trump didn't become calmer, he became louder. The habits that once entertained audiences now collided with institutions designed to slow impulse. Courts, Congress, allies who spoke in paragraphs instead of punches. From day one, he governed the same way he had lived. Conflict first, control through pressure, loyalty over expertise. Advisors came and went like seasonal employees. Some left quietly, others were pushed out publicly, turned into villains overnight. This wasn't chaos by accident. Trump believed instability kept people off balance, and off-balance people are easier to dominate. But governing a country isn't branding a building. International relationships don't respond to bravado the way tabloids do. Bureaucracies don't bend to certainty alone. Reality doesn't negotiate with slogans. Still, he pushed. Trade wars framed as strength, allies treated as competitors, enemies spoken to directly, bypassing tradition. Supporters saw courage, critics saw recklessness, and both were watching the same man. Then came the moments that hardened lines permanently. Impeachments, investigations, relentless headlines. Trump never apologized, not once in the way people expected. Instead, he reframed. Every accusation became a witch hunt. Every inquiry became proof of persecution. Every loss became evidence of a rigged system. To people who already distrusted institutions, this wasn't denial, it was confirmation. But time doesn't stop for anyone, not even presidents. An election arrived, and this time, the outcome didn't bend. Defeat landed not quietly, but explosively. Trump didn't concede, he contested, he challenged, he escalated. The same refusal to accept loss that once fueled comebacks now turned inward, tightening until it fractured something deeper. January unfolded. History recorded it not as ambiguity, but as rupture. Supporters felt betrayed. Critics felt vindicated. The world watched in disbelief. For the first time, Trump wasn't just polarizing opinion, he was reshaping norms. And yet, even after leaving office, something familiar happened. He didn't disappear. Investigations followed, charges surfaced, courtrooms replaced boardrooms. Again, the headlines multiplied. Again, attention surged. Again, mockery mixed with fear. Because Trump, even diminished, remained impossible to ignore. Defeated, then dominant, then defeated again, and still speaking, still performing certainty, still refusing silence. Here's the uncomfortable truth people avoid. Trump's story isn't about success or failure. It's about persistence without reconciliation. He never sought approval. He sought impact. And impact doesn't require agreement. It requires presence. Whether history remembers him as builder or breaker will depend on who writes it. But one fact remains unmovable. He lived his entire life the same way, never backing down, never apologizing for being himself, never allowing defeat to be final. For better or worse, that defiance became his legacy. And for anyone listening to this story from the future, there's a lesson buried beneath the noise. Not about politics, not about money, but about identity. If you build your entire self on resistance, you will never collapse quietly. But you may never rest either. And sometimes, the hardest victory isn't winning against the world. It's knowing when to stop fighting it. Donald Trump never wanted to be understood. He wanted to be heard. From the beginning, silence was his enemy. Obscurity terrified him more than criticism ever could. Even as a child, raised in privilege, there was pressure. Not poverty, but expectation. Not hunger, but comparison. His father taught him a brutal lesson early. The world is divided into winners and losers, and mercy belongs to neither side. So Trump learned to perform strength before he fully possessed it. Confidence first, proof later. That habit followed him everywhere. When casinos failed, he didn't retreat, he rebranded. When creditors circled, he reframed debt as leverage. When elites mocked him, he attacked their credibility instead of repairing his own. He didn't ask to be accepted into high society. He dared it to reject him. And when it did, he turned rejection into fuel. Television made him larger than life. Politics made him unavoidable. Controversy made him immortal in conversation. The man never tried to be likable. He tried to be undeniable. That distinction explains everything. Supporters didn't follow him because he was flawless. They followed him because he voiced anger they were told to hide, resentment they were to suppress, distrust they were told was impolite. Trump didn't calm those emotions. He validated them. And that validation created loyalty stronger than logic. But there is a cost to never bending. When you live in permanent defiance, every compromise feels like betrayal. Every criticism feels like war. Every loss feels illegitimate. By the end, Trump wasn't just fighting opponents. He was fighting reality itself. Courts, elections, facts, and reality doesn't respond to volume. History will argue over him for decades. Some will say he exposed corruption. Others will say he normalized chaos. Both can be true. But beyond politics, beyond ideology, beyond headlines, there is a deeper truth in his life story. Trump built an identity so loud that it could not be erased, even when stripped of power, even when facing judgment, even when history turned colder. He remained the same man, unapologetic, defiant, unwilling to retreat into quiet regret. That kind of ego can build empires. It can also burn bridges faster than they can be rebuilt. So what is the lesson here really? Not that arrogance wins, not that defiance guarantees success, but that the self you refuse to abandon will follow you everywhere, to the top and to the fall. Donald Trump never allowed the world to make him smaller, and because of that, the world was forced to deal with him again and again and again. Whether history thanks him or condemns him is not for this story to decide. But one thing is certain, he never backed down, he never went quiet, he never asked permission to exist loudly. And in a world that often punishes those who refuse silence, that alone made him impossible to forget.